then went through a third stage. You know, look at New Zealand and Australia. Now look at the third stage when I was elected onto the World Confederation, which was based in London. And Glenn Park, interestingly enough, had been on the original board when it was first formed back in the 50s. She went to the very first meeting. And unfortunately, by the time I was elected, Glenn passed on. Otherwise, I would love to have talked to her about it. And this, of course, exposed me to a lot of other areas of concern in the underdeveloped countries. And I'll talk about some of my experiences about that shortly. But I was on the board for the first 4 years, chaired by Margaret List from Germany. And it worked satisfactorily, but there was no great impetus in getting out into the wider area. What I mean by that is the wider world. The developing countries realistically were being neglected. The emphasis seemed to be on those who were financially stable. There was no entrepreneurial attitude towards pushing WCPT into these countries that really needed assistance. And I could see that quite rapidly in the piece. And fortunately, a friend of mine from Germany, Eckhard Buller, who was the president of Germany at the time, could see that as well. Even though our chairman was from Germany, she was seen as being part of the executive, or the president, I should say, and Eckhart was representative on the council, coming from Germany. I think in those days there were 7 or 8 seats, apart from the 3 on the executive. There's 11. Managed out of an office in London by Miss Mackay, who'd been there for some years. And she was a wonderful soul, very dry, and and very efficient. Anyhow, she then, I'm just trying to think of the date, it would have been, we had a conference in 87 in Sydney, which was the turning point, really, of the profession. She had been involved in it right up to that time and was retiring right at the end of it. And so they'd appointed another lady, Margaret O'Hare, a remarkable soul who spoke 6 languages. She had a postdoctorate degree in semiconductors from Grenoble University in France, and had worked within the British government sphere as well. So she had an exposure to a wide variety of things, and a bit of a Peter Pan character, marvellous administrator, and capacity to work. So she came in just at the right time, because 87 was a bit of a failure, in so much as that the conference failed by one to have a quorum, which was a bit of a disaster, really. Our good friend Mr. Zaki from Egypt, who was coming all along, decided not to come in the end. And unfortunately, the directions of the day, or the constitution of the day, said that the membership had to be 50% plus 1. We had 50%, but we didn't have the plus 1. So in fact, it turned out to be a general meeting that had no form. That was in 87. We had a very successful conference. The clinical components were wonderful. We had about 2,500 people there. I was the treasurer of the Australian organising body, even though I was on the WCPT committee. And that set up the Australian Research Foundation. We were able to donate to them $250,000, and that started their research foundation off as a result of all the free time people gave to set it going. Doreen Moore chaired it. She was a wonderful soul, and quite a number of the people came from the university, or Cumberland College, as it was called then. Liz Ellis was the coordinator of the head of the program, the scientific program. Very smart, and we had wonderful people. In fact, I thought, even though I was fully involved, it was a terrific program. And we had numerous presenters. I couldn't tell you how many now. But it was very successful. But the organisation itself, WCPT, failed in so much as that they weren't able to enact any motions of business. Prior to this, of course, starting back in the 82 conference in Stockholm, there's an enormous movement about getting South Africa out, which came from the Eastern Bloc and a couple of other countries. They thought it was apartheid was abhorrent. We're all aware of that, but they thought it was time to put them aside, excommunicate them. Well, fortunately, the meeting at the time said, look, we're not a political body, and we think we can do more from staying with them than going out. And that really changed the concept of what we had to do, in so much as that we really needed to say to these other developing countries, we're supporting you. And so in 88 we met again in London and put the constitutional changes up for a meeting to take place, and I think it was with a membership of like 10 members plus one. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was very much easier to hold a general meeting and to enact the notice of motion. And so we had the general meeting first, changed the whole constitution around with no problem at all. And South Africa is still a member, but there was a determination to really try and do things in Africa to assist their change, because they espoused that apartheid was abhorrent to them as well, and they had black members of the South African society, and they were a bit on the offside with the government as a result over there. And then in '88, at this meeting, I was fortunate enough to be elected as the president, and there were some really good people involved in the organisation, with Ruth Wood from the States, AJ Fernando from Canada, he had a very senior position at the university in Manitoba. Winnipeg. That's right. David Teager from England, of course. He was on the board, and Jean Brudeau from France, and Ingrid Odin from Sweden. Well, and she was very outspoken about this, about the apartheid business. But what we then did was, with those people who were elected, and somebody from Japan and another guy from Thailand, and of course Germany with Urquhart Bowler, we still had 11 on the board. And so it really was a bit top heavy. We didn't think that we needed 11s. And so what we did quite quickly was to change the organisation so that they were representative of an area, not so much of their country. And I moved that at our board level, that we look at forming 5 regions, with one region supporting a lesser part of the region, one group of countries supporting a lesser part. And as an example, Australia and New Zealand are in what's called the Asian Western Pacific. And so those two countries, and indeed places like Hong Kong, Singapore, support Indonesia, Thailand, Fiji, Vanuatu, all these other countries, and indeed Korea, which is a very, very prominent, and Japan was involved in this as well, of course. But it meant that there was a core of strong countries supporting the lesser ones. And in Europe, which we divided up into really north and south, Northern Europe, which was very strong, with Scandinavia, UK, and then there was France, Germany. They took under their wing all the Eastern Bloc countries, who were just emerging from the communism and so forth, and really struggling with management and funding. They also looked after, and I think from memory, 2 or 3 of them. It may have been Denmark, it may have been just Scandinavia, looked after parts of Africa. And as Africa grew, I think Europe, they shared the load between Eastern Europe and Africa, being much more accessible from Europe into Africa. And they did a lot of work in establishing organisations in Uganda. Kenya was pretty strong even then. And South Africa, they took on Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was fairly well organised, but Zambia was struggling financially. Nigeria out in the west. So realistically, the strong groups supported the lesser groups, which proved to be very, very successful. Now the membership today is well over 100. And I can remember when I started, there was about 42. And when I took on the president job, I think there was about 48. And it doubled. And that's since in the last 20 years. And of course Russia's there, Italy was always a problem, they were in there, Portugal was always there, Spain, Romania. And as you know, the European countries have broken up substantially, and there's now Slovakia and Czech. And from the reading, from the items I get from the office in London, there's an enormous amount of work going on worldwide. And the acceptance of the profession internationally is much greater than it's ever been. And I see that, little instances I'll talk about. In Korea at one stage, they had a major problem in that the neurologists wanted to take direction of any of the problems within the physiotherapy field that the neurologists felt they should handle. They thought that the physios weren't competent to do it. Anyhow, and there were hundreds of these guys, and so we took it to the Minister for Health of the Korean government. And I was a bit fortunate because my practice, or one of my practices in Sydney, had an enormous Korean population. So I was able to contact these guys and learn a little bit about the structure. And they invited me, I went up. I had letters of introduction from senior guys in the Korean business area. And of course, their politics is all based around money generally. And that gave me access to their Minister for Health. And I had the lady who was the chairman of the Korean group with me. And there was somebody else, I just can't remember off the top of my head who it was. And he gave us an hour of his time. And we told him, I'd already written to him, and told him quite forcefully that these people, their education program was satisfactory, terrific in fact. They were very good clinicians, hard workers. They didn't need the neurologist to intervene between their general practitioner and themselves, because I think the neurologists were trying to look after their own interests a bit. And in the end, he just told them to forget it. He told the neurologist this was not on. So it was just a little thing like that made a big difference to the practice there.